Croeso i chi gyd i'r bennod yma yn y gyfres o FCTV. Fy enw i yw Gwennan Evans ac rwy'n gweithio fel swyddog technegol yn y sector llaeth ar gyfer cyswllt ffermio. Yn ystod y rhaglen yma, byddwn nhw'n dod â'r newyddion diweddara a thrafod prosiectau o fewn i'r rwydwaith o ffermydd ar ddangos ar draws Cymru. Dros y Gaeaf, Silwair yw'r asgwrn cefn y sustem porthi a'r mwyafrif o ffermydd yma yng Nghymru, ac felly mae'n hanfodol i bod ni'n cael y rheolaeth yna yn gywir. Yn ystod y bennod yma, byddwn nhw'n ymweld â ffermydd sydd wedi newid eu systemau Silwair nhw er mwyn gwella ansawdd a lleihau costau.
So here in class I milk 200 cows on approximately 350 acres then. The cows are British Frisian cross and we calve in 2 blocks in the spring and the autumn. Regards to silage, we aim to do three cuts of silage with the 4th cut of bales then. Feeling that the autumn calvers weren't milking as well as they should then during winter when they're obviously on silage. They're only fed silage and cake in the parlour. I thought we could increase the yield a bit then. So we looked into that in this project. So we asked Dave Davis for advice on improving just the overall silage quality. Dave came out and we had a look at the silage we had at the time and had a look around the clamp and how we did our silage basically and the system. And there's just small, I think, changes we made to improve our overall silage quality. We looked at firstly the use of silopactor, which I hadn't used before. So we used that the first cut and the second cut last season. I think it worked well. Dave has done some compaction samples on that to see what results were, and they were positive then. So I aim to use that again this year. I felt we definitely got more in the pit as well, more silage in the pit. So we definitely use that again this year. Another thing was to look at additives as well. So we've used Decosile last year. We just looked at what would suit us and how these additives worked then. Another issue I had was that I didn't put a side sheet on the clamp. It's quite a big clamp and I feel it's a lot of work doing that on my own then, putting a side sheet up. But just to improve the sealing around the side of the clamp, I've used gravel bags now instead of tyres. It has improved the overall sealing of the clamp around the sides, especially with using 2 sheets, so with like a cling film style sheet first, then a black sheet on top. So there is a lot less losses around the sides of the clamp with that then. A few tweaks we've done with the overall process of making silage, and we've gone in sooner after mowing with a tedder then. So the tedder will be in the field within an hour after mowing basically, and we try to pick up within 24 hours of cutting then, just to reduce the wilting time. I think that's made a difference as well, yes. Working with the contractor regards to their timing of when they do the cutting and picking up and tedding then, and they've been very flexible with that and have accommodated me very well.
Mae yna nifer y ffactorau sydd yn effeithio ar safon Silwair sy'n cael ei gynaeafu'n flynyddol. Fod tywydd wrth gwrs allan o'r rheolaeth ni, mae sawl peth y gallwn ni wneud i wella'r ansawdd. Dyma Dave Davis o Silage Solutions i sôn fwy am y pethau hyn.
When we're feeding dairy cows, we need to remember that silage quality is related to grass quality. It's the first step. And if you're not going to graze that grass and you're thinking you need an extra bit of yield, often that grass is then deteriorating in the field in terms of quality. And if your cows wouldn't graze it, why do we expect them to eat the silage and make milk from it? So early cutting times, as in from when the field was closed for the growth, we should be looking at a maximum of 5.5 weeks. And that has the benefit of having a higher D value. D value is related directly to the ME of the silage and crude protein. And D value will drop by 0.5% units a day when we get to the seed stem formation. So that is one of the key parameters. And then in terms of cutting and wilting, we need to cut and ideally, if we can, wilt within the same day. As soon as we've cut the grass, the sugars are disappearing, some of the protein's disappearing, and then we're actually losing D value, and you can lose up to 4 units of D value during that wilting time. We'll always lose some, so ideally we want to cut and head out immediately to speed up the wilting process to reduce the losses of sugar, which is a direct loss of D value. And then bringing that silage into, or that grass into the clamp, we need to ensure that we're bringing it in ideally at 30% dry matter. So if we can cut 10 o'clock in the morning when the dew's risen and pick up later that afternoon, that's ideal. If we've got a heavier crop and we need to wilt overnight, then cutting in the afternoon and picking up the next morning, early afternoon is the way to go. But bearing in mind, wilting overnight is very, very slow, whereas wilting in the day is much more rapid. When we're bringing that grass in, we need to consider chop length and varying the chop length depending on the dry matter. And when we're up at 30% dry matter, then we can be down to 1.5 inches, 5 centimetres. But if it's wetter, we do need to increase that chop length a little bit. And then compacting into the clamp, even layers, and persuaded Ewan to use the compactor. I think he's seen a big benefit. We should have a target density of 750 kilograms per metre cubed in that drier silage. When I came first to the farm, Ewan wasn't far off that, but he was a bit low, and particularly against the walls where it's more difficult, he was probably down at 550. He's used the compactor and he was up at 800 over the majority of his silage. Again, it's a little less dense next to the walls, that's always the case, but it's much more even. And that's important because if we've got poor compaction, we're trapping oxygen, we're actually again losing those sugars, losing protein and reducing our D value. So even layers, filling rapidly and then sealing well. And you know, some farms there's always a discussion about side sheets. I absolutely think side sheets are essential. Some farms it's difficult on some of the walls to put a side sheet up, but one of the key things there is to make sure you're sealing that top sheet against the wall even if you're not using a side sheet. And tyres, when you use tyres, you've always got a bit of a gap where you've not got that strong seal. So again, I discussed with Ewan about using gravel bags up against the sidewall, and that makes sure that you've got a good seal. Gravel bags touching all the way up the sidewall, all the way down the ramp and along the back wall, and that means you've completely sealed that clamp. No oxygen can get in, and that means that we're reducing those oxygen degradation processes, and we're improving the quality, because when we get losses, it's always the most nutritive part that we're losing. And again, there's a big discussion to be had about silage additives. When you're going to optimum quality, when you're doing this 5.5 week regrowth, your risks of aerobic spoilage in your clamp are lower because you've got less yeast and molds coming in, but your risks of a poorer fermentation are greater because we've got lower sugar and higher protein, and that makes that crop more difficult to ensile. So there's a lot of additives on the market that are designed, a lot of inoculants that are designed to improve aerobic stability, but actually they decrease silage quality, and there's no evidence that they have a beneficial effect on milk production. Whereas the type of additive, which was a Lactobacillus plantarum sole product, homofermentative, that Ewan used last year, will improve the fermentation, it'll bring the pH down more rapidly and stop the degradative processes, and those sorts of additives have got a lot of data showing a benefit for milk production. If we consider we're feeding dairy cows, they have a requirement for protein. We should have a target of at least 16% crude protein in our grass silages, and the only way we're going to get there is by the application of slurries, maximising the use of slurries, but then topping up with fertiliser. And I've got a piece of advice: to do a pre-cut analysis the week you're cutting, Monday or Tuesday, or the week before if necessary, and send that for analysis, and you're looking for the crude protein number, which should come back at 16, 17, 18%, and the nitrate N. And the nitrate N should be 0.15% on a fresh matter basis. If you're at that level, that means you've hit your targets for fertiliser nitrogen, and you should have a good quality silage with high protein quality. If you're at 14% crude protein and 0.05% fresh matter on the nitrate end, that means you didn't add enough fertiliser nitrogen, and that means you're going to have to supplement more. And protein supplements are going to be probably as expensive, if not more expensive, than that fertiliser nitrogen. So use that as a gauge for your next cut if you've cut back too far, and seriously consider the economics of that. In addition, we need to consider sulphur. A sulphur analysis is slightly more expensive than the nitrogen analyses. We should have a ratio of 12:1 nitrogen to sulphur in our grasses. If it's 14:1 when that analysis comes back, that means you didn't have enough sulphur. And a couple of the amino acids, methionine, cysteine, are sulphur amino acids. If the grass hasn't got enough sulphur, it can't make those amino acids. It doesn't matter how much nitrogen you put on, you will not get to that crude protein target. So again, a pre-cut analysis, or 2 or 3 weeks after you've shut the field for sulphur and nitrogen, will tell you where you're at with that ratio, and you can increase your sulphur fertilisation as well. Many farmers think bale silage is poorer quality than clamp. It shouldn't be. Remember that the quality of the grass that you're cutting for bales can be just as good as that of clamp silage, and that's really based on the target of the animals you're feeding. The only subtle difference is that ideally we want to be up to 35–45% dry matter with the bales, so wilt rapidly, but wilt just a little bit longer. We don't want excessive wilts because that means we're losing quality in the field. And then when it comes to baling, we want to make a nice square edge bale, so that means we want a nice tidy box shape swath that we're baling. Get a square edge, we get an even wrap over that square edge. This bale's not quite so good. We can see that we've got lumps and bumps. Here it's been overstretched. That means that we've got oxygen penetrating, more oxygen penetrating because the wrap's overstretched. So big, nice square edge bales. The other thing to focus on is that, just to remember that 70–75% of the volume of the bale is within 20 centimetres of the wrap. So if we damage that wrap, if we don't apply the wrap correctly, we're actually having a significant effect on that 70% of the silage in there. So if in the past you've wrapped with 4 layers of wrap, and you've been noticing some mould on that silage, then consider going up to 6 layers of wrap. Obviously this year the cost of wrap is going to be linked to the oil price, and obviously it's going to be more expensive, but you know, bear in mind that quality does cost that little bit extra, and if we've got a loss of quality, we've actually had a significant loss of quality in terms of feed value. So ideally 6 layers of wrap, and then in terms of stacking, ideally we should be wrapping at the stacking site. I know a lot of combi balers are used these days, so we're wrapping in the field. Just consider how rough the journey is from that field, and take care not to damage that wrap if you've wrapped in the field. And then in terms of stacking, there is some people now going over to stacking on their ends, but actually if we consider stacking on their ends, then we've got to remember that that bale will squash down. We can actually have damage to that wrap where oxygen can penetrate. Where we stack in this direction, in this orientation, those bales fit into one another, so we're sealing bale on bale. So in my opinion, this is a better way of stacking. Just remember that if you're stacking on a rough surface, you can damage the wrap there. There is an argument that if they're wetter bales, we should only be stacking 2 high, and if it's below 25% dry matter, 1 high. If we're up at 45% dry matter, then I'm happy with 4 high. Some people will argue that you should never go higher than 3 high, but to be honest, if they're dry bales, 4 high is okay, but never higher than 4 high.
Un fferm sydd wedi gwneud tipyn o newidiadau dros y blynyddoedd i wellau system porthiant yw tŷ draw yn Rheffynon. Non Williams sydd ar y fferm yn Sir Fflint i ddod â'r hanes i gyd i ni.
Helo, Non Williams dwi, a dwi'n swyddog technegol ci coch ar gyfer cyswllt ffermio yng Ngogledd Cymru. Heddiw yma dwi ar fferm tŷ draw ger Rheffynon, ble mae David a Matthew Roberts yn ffermio. Mae David a Matthew wedi gwneud nifer o newidiadau i'r busnes mewn blynyddoedd diweddar mwyn gwella'r perfformiad, ac un ohonyn nhw ydy edrych yn ofalus ar sut maen nhw'n mynd ati i gynhyrchu ac yneuafu Silwair. Efo fi heddiw mae David a Matthew i drafod ymhellach.
Cefndir ffarm ydy, dwi'n ffarmio fan hyn efo mab Matthew. Dyn ni'n ffarmio 500 o ceri, yn cadw rhwng 200 a 300 o wartheg o rhoi 4 mis i fyny a pesgu bob peth. 1,400 o fogiau, heini mogiau croes texol, rhoi hwrd texol iddyn nhw i gyd, a gwerthu gyd o'i hwyn nhw'n dew, a gyd yn mynd i Morrisons.
Matthew, beth o'r system arferol chi neu draddodiadol chi o gynhyrchu Silwair?
O flaen, o'n i'n just wneud un toriad mawr dros y ffarm, cael allan mis Mai Mehefin, wedyn torri mis Gorffennaf, a just yn torri o pan o'n i'n meddwl bod o'n barod, dwi'n bwys faint o wythnosau o, just pan o'n o bulk yna, wedyn newid rwan y system o wneud mwy o toriadau, cychwyn cael allan diwedd mis Ebrill, cychwyn Mai, a torri pob 5-6 wythnos neu'n gynt os da ni'n meddwl bod o'n barod.
Felly, be ydych chi wedi newid ers hynny?
Rhyw 6 mlynedd yn ôl, a ni colli swp mawr o tir dros lawr y ffordd. Felly, heb y tir yna, o'n i colli lot o tir silage a pob peth. Wedyn o'n i'n meddwl, fe rhaid ni edrych ar ôl y tir sydd gen ni yn well. So, o'n i cysylltiad mewn Rhys Owen i gael ei farn o beth oedd y gorau i wneud, be gorau i tyfu. A wedyn, da ni wedi ailhadu lot wan. Ac, wel, dim jyst ailhadu, di testio'r pridd, di rhoi calch lawr, a wedyn, da ni tyfu lot o clover coch wan. A mae hwnna'n swtio ni'n well. Mae'n pesgu'r ŵyn yn dda, a wedyn gawn ni cropiau dda Silwair hefyd.
Mae wedi gwneud gwahaniaeth mawr i ni, yr ailhadu yma. Da ni'n wedi sylweddoli tan ddiweddar. Bod yr ansawdd, mae'r porfa wedi dod yn gynt. Da ni wedi dod â ffod y beat i fewn i'r rotation hefyd, a wedyn mae hwnnw wedi cymryd y pwysau yn ffitio'n Gaeaf. Da ni wedi gallu cadw'r porfa yn gynt, a wedyn ar ôl wyna mae'r defed a gwyn yn mynd allan i mwy o borfa sy'n safio mwy o bres i ni eto.
Rhan mowr o beth da ni wedi newid ydy ffitio sut mae'r system ailhadu'n ffitio i fewn yn gylchdro cnydau ar y ffarm. A hefyd da ni wedi cyflwyno miliwn coch ar y ffarm hefyd ers rhai blynyddoedd rwan. Mae hynny wedi lleihau costau yr gwrtaeth sydd angen i gynhyrchu Silwair, a wedi gwella ansawdd y Silwair na hefyd yn codi'r protein. A mi wnaeth y clofar coch na'r miliwn coch gario ymlaen chwarae rhan yn y system, fel mae'r cropia grawn yn dod yn dol ar y tir hefyd, fydden nhw'n lleihau yr costau, yr nitrogen yn fanna hefyd. Mae miliwn coch, maen nhw'n gallu, mae'r bacteria sy'n byw ar y nodules ar y gwreiddiau, mae hynny'n gallu cyfrannu rhwng 150 a 180 o kilos o nitrogen yr hectar dros flwyddyn. A wedyn, mae hynny wrth gwrs yn dreifio'r system hefyd. Mae gwella ansawdd y Silwair yma yn tu draw, sy'n dweud wedi codi'r M1 a fyny o 10.8 ar 1 pwynt i fyny. Gafataledd o 11.5 wan ar ochr yr system beef ar y ffarm. I bob tunnell o Silwair maen nhw'n ffidio fanna rwan. Mae'r potensial ar gyfer tyfiant yr anifeiliaid yna wedi cynyddu 8 kilo y tunnell o dry matter. Just oddi ar gynhyrchu silage o ansawdd gwell. Wedi symud hefyd wrth gwrs i dorri'n hynt yn y flwyddyn. Mae rhywun yn torri'r glaswell a'r miliwn a'r bwynt lle maen nhw yn llai eiddfed, lle mae'r ansawdd yn llawer uwch. A wedyn wrth gwrs yn torri mwy rheoledd o hynny hefyd, a oherwydd hynny dydy rhywun ddim yn torri'r glaswell ar bwynt lle mae o'n eiddfed. Mae'r ail dyfiant yn gynt a mae rhywun yn tyfu mwy o laswell dros yr un cyfnod ag ansawdd gwell.
Mae bod yn fwy gynaliadwy a lleihau ôl traed carbon yn darged i bob ffarmwr yng Nghymru erbyn hyn. Non Williams sydd yng nghwmni un ffarmwr sydd wedi mynd i'r afael â hyn, sef Dylan Jones, Castellio'r Porthaethwy.
Felly Dylan, fedrwch chi roi dipyn o gefndir y ffarm i ni?
Ia, dwi'n ffarmio mewn partneriaeth efo'n nhad, ac da ni'n ffarmio 800 acar tafel y carreg o'r bont ar Ynys Môn. Y gwartheg ydi prif beth dyddi yma ar y ffarm lly. Da ni'n darfod 200 o wartheg ar beth da ni'n dyfu'n unig, sustem hunan gynhaliol mewn ffordd. Wedyn hefyd mae yna rhyw 500 o wyn beinw a 500 o wyn stor.
Felly, da chi di addasu dipyn ar y ffarm, y busnes mewn ffordd mewn blynyddoedd diweddar?
Do, oedd o'n, benderfyniad, da ni'n mynd yn ôl, ta degawd yn siŵr, mae wedi cymryd dipyn amser i ni i ddod lledan ni heddiw, lle. A wedyn, penderfynu bod ni wedi mynd ar ochr y warthau cyn bellad oedd ni'n gallu. A wedyn, oedd rhaid rhywbeth roed, a wedyn y defed y gwyn oedd hynny. A wedyn mynd o wyna a cadw mwy o warthau mewn ffordd. Ac drwy hynny, da ni'n rhaid dipyn mwy o yd lawr. Mae yna 300 acar o haidd sy'n mynd lawr, mae hwnnw'n y ddaear heddiw. Lle. A wedyn, am mynd just cael system hunan ganhaliol, fel bod ni'n mwyn gorfod prynu dim byd i mewn. Dwi'n meddwl bod y margin yn bwysig iawn i ni, ac oedden ni'n gweld sut oedden ni'n gallu elwa porfa ar y ffarm drwy gwneud cylchdroiad efo'r grawn a porfeydd byr dymor. Lle.
Sut mae'r newidiadau mae'r busnes wedi cael effaith ar y ffordd ydych chi'n cynhyrchu Silwair?
Da ni sylfaen yn rasiwn i orffan gwartheg ni ydy y Silwair mewn ffordd. Mae'r ainig o hwnnw'n iawn. A mae gennym ni 3 neu 4 o math o Silwair gwahanol da ni reid yn y rasiwn. Mae gennym ni y clofar coch fel sydd o'n blaena ni fyma. Mae hwnnw'n mynd i rasiwn a mae gennym ni Westerwolds. A 2 ELA high protein, high sugar a 3 to 4 ELA o'r un math. A wedyn, mond siapio hwnnw i weithio i'r gwartheg i ddigwyr. Ac da ni di arbrofi lot mewn wahanol ffyrdd, wahanol math o Silwair, a dwi'n meddwl bod angen prynu dim byd i mewn. Mae rhywun yn gallu twicio system i ffitio beth ydych chi eisiau o'r gwartheg. Drwy dyfu 300 acar o rawn, mae'n anodd cael digon o dir i reid dim byd hir dymor, felly mae yna lot o 2 to 3 ELAs. Ac mae meillion a meillion coch yn bwysig iawn i ni o ran protein. Hefyd Westerwolds, mae'r Westerwolds yn dod mewn fel da ni'n clero'r cae ar ôl yr yd, ac fydd y cut cyntaf o fewn 5 wythnos wedyn. A mae hwn i gyd yn i'r clamp. Rhan fwyaf, fydd y clofar coch mewn bels. Da ni'n lliadio un o hynny i rasiwn yn ddyddiol. Mae'r crimp yn dod da just dros 1,000 o dinelli ni, a mae'n un 2 tunnell y dydd. A wedyn dwi'n gallu gwneud siŵr bod gen i'r ddigon o wartheg wedyn. Mae'r cynnyrch iddyn nhw gael i fwydo nhw yna. A wedyn dwi'n gallu dweud wrth unrhyw lafdu bod fi'n gallu gorffan hyn yn y wartheg. Mae o'n, fel ni'n dweud, y Silwair sy'n bwysig. I gael y cynnyrch o'r ansawdd gorau mwy thebyg, ella sa rai bobl yn anghytuno fo fi, ond da ni yn licio cael perianna'n hunan yn gyr a gwneud y job yn hunan. Da ni yn codi Silwair i gyd yn hunan, a wedyn da ni'n cael mynd i mewn, pan mae'n barod, a pan mae'r tywydd yn ffafriol. Mae yna 140 acar o Westerwolds a fast grass fel sy'n ni'n galw fo yma. Rhan mwyaf yna'n ail gut, a dim math o giwana o gwbl mewn ffordd. Y gut cyntaf, Hydref dwytha wrth gwrs, ac da ni'n newid cael cut wan wythnos dwytha yn Ebrill. A hynny fod dim nitrogen o gwbl. Da ni'n bwydo, da ni'n gwneud mix neu rasiwn fel da ni'n fo bob diwrnod trwy'r flwyddyn. Mae yna wartheg i mewn fel yma trwy'r flwyddyn mewn ffordd. A wedyn mae yna wartheg yn mynd yn wythnosol. Ac y gymysgedd i gyd yn mynd trwy'r feeder wagon. Fel sylfaen wrth gwrs, da ni eisiau'r Silwair yn iawn, a mae yna meillion coch a meillion trwyddo fo. A wedyn y crimp wrth gwrs, a'i gymysgio, a dim ond yn syml iawn i fwydo o'i blaen yn y fel yma. Da ni'n pwyso'r ein yn wythnosol, mae yna 100 wartheg yn cael ei pwyso yn wythnosol, a da ni'n tracio arnyn nhw. Ac os dyn nhw'n dal yn perfformio, maen nhw'n cael aros, os dyn nhw'n platwio ffwr lle maen nhw wedi cyrraedd i pwysa, felly wrth gwrs maen nhw'n gorfod mynd.
Mae cysylltiwr yn gwbl hunan gynhaliol ac mae cynhyrchu Silwair o safon yn sylfaen i'r sustem hon.
A dyna ni wedi dod at ddiwedd y bennod yma. Os hoffwch wybod mwy am yr hyn o fewn y bennod yma, cofiwch gysylltu gyda'ch swyddog datblygu lleol neu rhif canolog.